Gitsipeta pio, Myers, Pumo, Kinana, Christi Quay. Kinaka, Patsini, Koyam Street. Ayers, Pumo, Kinakito, Kito, Mansanika, Montan. My name is Reg Crowshoe. In our language, it's Awakasina, dear chief. My grandfather's name was given to me, and I hope I can fill his shoes. That's a big order for the old man and his knowledge. We lit a smudge, and you've asked me questions about relatives. Nikchuko, actually, we say in our language, relatives. So, because the smudge is lit, when I talk, I would look at it as doing a true thing. Okay? So, whatever I've researched in my mind, what I've seen my grandparents and parents and relatives in the community, what I've heard them and see them do about relatives, is my oral knowledge of relatives. So I'm going to do a reaccounting of all those and smudge them for you today as true thing. I'm telling you the truth of what I heard and what I know. One time I asked one of the professors at the university in science department, I asked him, what you're talking about facts. What are facts? And he looked at me and said, well, facts are simply just the truths. You bring out the truths, those are facts. And so in science, we go by facts. I said, okay. So when I think back to the smudge and the truth thing that the elders talk about, talking about facts, you're building knowledge, you're building oral knowledge. That's why when you make the smudge, you do a truth thing, the truth thing becomes fact, and all these facts that you remember, like I did from all those grandparents and parents, that's oral knowledge that we maintain. And from that oral knowledge, with the smudge, I'm picking out a topic that you questioned me about, which is relative. So I'll talk about what I know about relative. So when I was young, my grandmother that raised me, she said, Awakasina, when I was young, my grandmother told me how Creator created the whole creation. Now I'm going to tell you about it, so listen and watch my actions. So in our way to remember things is watching, listening, and following actions. That's our way of remembering things. So she would tell me, watch me do the actions, and so that's how I remember in an oral, using oral skills to remember. Anyway, she said my grandmother talked to me about Creator. And she was my grandmother. Ikis Chanupada is her name. She was born in 1880. So when she talks about her grandmother, it puts her grandmother well into the late 1700s, where in our area there was never any newcomers in the area yet. So the knowledge she talked about at that time was uncontaminated knowledge. It never went through residential school or reservations at all. And that's what the knowledge she was sharing. So so I'll just skim over it so that we can understand it. But she said, Creator he was in the universe by himself, and there was ghosts bothering him. And as these ghosts bothered him, he's trying to deal with it. And before she went on with the story, I'd say, "Nah," she would look at me, and I'd say, "What is ghosts?" She said, "Okay, ghosts are things you can't see: love, hate, anger, happiness, trauma, frustration, sickness. Those are all things you can't see. We call them stoics, which translates to ghosts. And that I guess are emotions, or that was what was bothering Creator. So Creator had a notion at that time to deal with these ghosts. So that's when the smudge was put together to do as a true thing. So we had this abstract part of our ways. And then what he did next was he grabbed into the universe and grabbed a bunch of magic dust. And he rolled it together with these ghosts, put it in the ghosts and the magic dust. And that was the beings that he created. So everything in the universe has a shadow. It has an abstract existence. If you don't, then you're a real ghost. But if you do, with creation, that's how we exist as real people, as real creation, with that shadow and a physical creation. So that put those together on the smudge, and he did his true thing. He said, "Here's a real person." But the whole universe was put together that way. So we all have parts of ghosts and real people. We all become that. But the other parts of the universe he puts together were the same because they were all made from the same magic dust. I'd say, "Nah," she'd look at me again. "What is magic dust?" So well, magic dust, she talked about the ghost and the physical. You put them together and it creates energy. So magic dust is energy. That's why you take the dust and put it together with the abstract. But she also said that physical and non-physical matter, magic dust, energy. She was talking about physics, how physics works. And she said that's how creation happened. Biomatter. So I thought, well, that's a parallel to Western science, talking about that biomatter. So I interpreted magic dust to biomatter, biocreation. And then next part she talked about, she said, everything that Creator created, we call it natural laws, natural laws. So there's many natural laws, she would say, in the universe. She would say the stars and the vacuum in space and the solid matter in space, all when they mix and communicate, those are space laws. and the grass and the animal and water, when they communicate, those are animal laws or grass laws. And she said, with humans, we communicate with all the universe. So our communication, those are making absolute laws that we follow. Those are knowledges. Those are our oral knowledges because they are our research. Those are our experiences. When we take our research and experience to the smudge to do a true thing, you're making knowledge. So as we look at the whole universe as magic beings, so when I translate magic beings, I translate it as biospecies. The whole universe is biospecies. And that's where as we communicate, we start developing laws, absolute laws from all those natural laws. But what natural laws gives us is the existence of, say, language laws. So Creator, when I think of a language law, the old lady would say, Creator took all that matter, rolled it into a ball, blew it off his hands and gave it the power to stay suspended. And then at that time, itchkumatumai. Itchkumatumai means he infused that creation with sound and vibration. So the whole world has sound and vibration. So that's a law. That sound is part of our language and the vibration. But at the same time, that I would look at that as a natural law of language. But Creator also gave us resource so that we can develop that law. And we have to be responsible for that resource. So, what are the resources? Well, when we say the word namu for a bee, or in Cree, it's amu. That's what the sound of the bee makes. We have to call the bee amu or namu. But if we don't look after the namu, they're going to disappear and we won't have the word anymore. So our responsibility and transparency is to look after our brother, relative, the bee, because it gives us language. And those are our resources. So we look at the bee as a brother or a human with a spirit, with a real body, and becomes a nichitapi, a real being, a real person. When we want water from the river, then I would say, well, my children, I want them drinking and swimming and fishing from this river. My great-grandchildren, 7 generations ahead, then I would say the river is a human also, because the river is going to have great-grandchildren 7 generations ahead. And those grandchildren have to survive together. So when I govern the use of the river, the way I look after the river as my relative, that's the governance I'll make with the smudge on how we use the water and how we would make laws for the use of water. So everything that we connected with, communicated with, those stories became our absolute laws, but they came from our relatives because we are also magic beings, part of other magic beings, so that we can live together and survive together. And then she would say, we were given what is Auchsin? Well, Auchsin is the environment that you're a part of. So I'm part of an environment where the bee and the water and the plants and the animals and are all a part of. We make laws for humans to follow, to be responsible for. So those are our relatives that we live amongst. So if they say you own this piece of land, it's going to be hard to say, how can I own this piece of land? How can I own Rose? Rose is my partner. We survive together. We're human, but I can't own her because I didn't make her, you know? So when Western concept of owning land came about, the elders were wondering, well, what is going on? What is this new concept? So those are things that we look at. So building relatives is so important with all recognizing everything as relatives is one of our basic principles and values that we have to live by. So when we're in our environment and we have to build a camp down in the river someplace, then we'll have a ceremony. We'll light the smudge, and the smudge is sanctified kindness for all. And then I would take the plants and the animals and the bugs and the whole parts of the environment, and I would ask them permission to bless 4 sticks that I'm going to put in the ground where I can live in that area. That can be a place where I can be a part of a new environment. So when we move camp, the elders would have a ceremony. They'll bless the sticks. The society younger members will run the sticks out to the new camp, and they'll mark the new camp. They'll say those sticks and that song for those sticks is our oral laws that allow us the jurisdiction to move to this new camp. If those sticks weren't there, we can't camp there. But we already asked them through this ceremony. We asked our relatives, the environment, and they gave us permission. And that's why we put the sticks there. We have in our stories, one time the buffalo used to eat people, okay? But the buffalo lived in the water. How can they breathe and live in the water? And I tell the old lady, how can they live and breathe underwater? And the old lady would say, remember, Bisachipiks, they're magic beings. They're underwater. All right, that's where they come from. And then the whole story about how a buffalo came out, transformed himself into a person, and he married this woman. And then the family found out, and both families, the buffalo family and the human family, were so upset. So when the families met, they decided to make a treaty. And when they made the treaty, they said, we'll give you half of our people and you give us half of your buffalo. So the day came when half the buffalo came out of the water. And the man kind of reneged on his deal. So he said, I'm not giving my people. I love my human. Anyway, that winter the water froze over and they had to cross to the other side. When they crossed to the other side, there was a horn sticking out of the ice. And as they rode across, this child started crying for that horn. And that woman said, you know how you can't deny your children. So he took her stone axe and started chipping around that, and as people were crossing, trying to get that horn out of the ice to give it to as child, and then she hit the end of the horn, and it hit the nerve, and the buffalo that was down there shook his head, and then all the ice broke, and half of the people went in, and that's how they took their payment of half of the people, because they already gave us half the buffalo. So they sang a treaty song at that time. We call it Iniskim. Hey, 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 Iniskim, my, oh, my, awani, oh, my. That's the Iniskim song. So through the years, they found a rock. It's a fossil that looks like an effigy of a buffalo. And that's where the song came from, that effigy. So I showed the scientist, and I said, what kind of fossil is this? So he took it, he said, I'll find out. He came back and he said, you know, that fossil is a part of creation of the world. He said that fossil is so many million years old, and it comes from the water. It's a fish fossil. So I thought, how come the old people knew the song for the buffalo stone was a fossil? That's why they say the buffalo lived in the water. That was their sciences. So anyway, today if we're gonna go hunt a buffalo, I gotta go to somebody with a buffalo stone and ask for permission to go and kill one buffalo or 5 buffalo, whatever. I have to ask for that song in a ceremony, and that person will make a smudge and grant your wishes or not grant your wishes, but they'll sing you that song for that one use of a buffalo. So I would look at that as our permit. If I'm going to go hunting today, I have to go to Fish and Wildlife and get a permit to kill a deer, you know. But for us, the buffalo song is that permit, that governance to look after our relatives, the buffaloes. Because if we don't use that song, they're going to die out, you know. So that's how we look at relationships. Or, I mean, relatives. Relatives are all related because of that magic dust. So we all become humans. So when we make laws, those laws need to be laws made with dignity and respect so that we can all survive into the future. You don't make those economic laws, you know. Today, for example, we were in the Sacred Waters Conference with the Pueblos and Zunis and Navajos and Hopis a couple weeks ago, and I told them the story about how they were worried about the Colorado River being so low. They were meeting with the government, they were meeting with industry and the cities and farmers and so on. So we talked about the concept of relatives, how the rivers are relative. But when the government, man-made government governed the river, they said, okay, the river will have sustainability by giving permits. So through their policies, they developed permits. And people started using permits. They used every bit of the permit because it was money, it was resource. So even if they don't use their water, they'll sell it to another farmer and so on. So that's how those permits abuse the water. They just seen dollar signs going down the river and they were pulling it out. And I said, what about if you look at that river as your brother or your another human, and how can that river's grandchildren survive into 7 generations with my grandchildren so they survive together? And you need to make laws with that kind of dignity and respect for another human being, a relative. So when you make laws, when you make policies, when you make guiding principles, those principles of a human, of a real person, needs to be a part of those laws and regulations and policies you put together, because then we can look at sustainability in a real way, in our real way of sustainability for looking after our relatives. So that's how we look at relatives. And out of living with relatives like the buffalo and the water and so on, we come to the context of governance. So as I look at governance, in our oral laws, we call a group of people coming together to achieve goals. We call them Kadakachi, all friends. When I say Kadakachi, all friends, that includes the whole environment, water, animals, and the space, the wind, everything, the birds, they're all our brothers. So we call a creation of a organization in our oral way, a legal organization is called a Kadakats, all friends group. But when you become a member of all that all friends group, you enter in through the smudge and you become a relative to all the other members. You're all brothers and sisters. So you buy in as relatives. And as your brother and sister, and then when you do your time in that all friends group, then you go to another all friends group, and the older age grade society, all friends group, you become a relative to a parent to this group that you just left. So you always look after their logistics when they get together. And then when you go the third generation to the third group, age group, you become a grandparent, because then you come in and you run their ceremony. But when you get to the fourth generation away, you're a great grandparent. So as a great grandparent, you're allowed to sit in their circle as living policies. You guide them. Anytime you're not a part of making decisions, but that's where you give your guide. That's why in our ceremonies we have our elders sitting there, because there are living policies. They guide us on what we need to do. So if we look at terms of reference, the all friends, the brothers and sisters are members. The all friends is the organization. Brother and sisters are members. The first generation away are your parents, but also that first generation away are your aunts and uncles. Because the parents and aunts and uncles work together. If you don't listen, then it's your uncles that are going to serve justice. So they're the board of directors, I would say. They're the board of directors, and your parents are the ones that look after logistics for your staff that works as brothers and sisters. Okay. And then above the board, we would look at the grandparents. Those are retired colleagues that come back and advise, or they facilitate. We hire them because they come back and teach that group. And then the fourth generation away is the great grandparents. But those great grandparents, like I say, are our policies. So when we look at everything from all friends through to brothers and sisters, to parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents, great grandparents, you look at those roles, those are our terms of reference. That's what protects our goals and objectives and membership. So those are legal organizations. That's how we would parallel today's Western, the corporate law would say an incorporated organization is its own legal entity. And that's recognized by the law as a legal entity. Well, that's our all friends society. When that legal entity puts together their goals and objectives and their bylaws, then they're putting together, their terms of reference, which is the same as ours. And then when they write their policies and approve them, they put them in files. But our policies don't live in filing cabinets. They're elders sitting in our group, So we do the same parallels in systems working together. So we're not that much far apart. And when I look at relatives is a part of our system, is a part of how we survive as an organization and a group. So that's how my grandmother talked to me about her grandmother talking about governance and what relatives are within a governance structure. Anya.